Welcome to Unit 9, Chocolate and the Industrial Revolution. The learning outcomes for this unit are: Number 1. Describe the Industrial Revolution and how it impacted the world. Articulate how chocolate production changed during the Industrial Revolution. Describe how chocolate consumption patterns changed. In this podcast, we're going to explore the Industrial Revolution and the profound change it brought to society. The period also represented a fundamental shift in chocolate production and the beginning of the modern chocolate bar. Many historians recognize the Industrial Revolution as being the most important change since the Agricultural Revolution 10,000 years earlier had seen us move from hunter-gatherer lifestyles to settled societies. While the Industrial Revolution changed industry and how we make things, it also brought about rapid and massive social change. It was during the Industrial Revolution that we began the worldwide human shift to an urban society. The Industrial Revolution also allowed for a population explosion and an overall rise in standard of living. The Industrial Revolution can be thought of as a shift in the energy sources for production. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, we relied almost entirely on either human or animal power to get things done. There are some exceptions, such as water wheels or windmills, but for the most part, it was humans or animals working. The Industrial Revolution shifted our power source to fossil fuels. Initially, this energy source was coal, but over time, petroleum and electricity would be used as well. The Industrial Revolution also brought about a fundamental shift in where we live. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, the vast majority of people lived in rural locations. We were mostly farmers, and farming wasn't all that efficient. However, the Industrial Revolution brought increased efficiency and industrial processes to farming techniques, and at the same time reduced the number of people needed to farm. People began to move from the countryside into the city in search of work. A process that began in the late 1700s has only accelerated as the Industrial Revolution spread around the world. This is a graph representing the continuing worldwide move from rural to urban from 1950 and projected into the future. In 2012, we passed an important milestone. There are now more people living in urban environments around the world than rural ones. This trend is expected to continue into the future. By 2050, it is estimated that 70% of humans will be urban dwellers. The Industrial Revolution also represented an explosion in population. As industrial processes revolutionized farming and increased food supplies, increasing standards of living allowed more and more babies to survive infancy. You can see on this graph that human populations had a nice slow climb during the Middle Ages, then shoot up dramatically during the 20th century as the Industrial Revolution spread to every corner of the planet. Post-industrial societies are defined by two important characteristics. Number 1, economic integration and specialization. We are all incredibly specialized and dependent on one another now. Think about how specialized your chosen profession is. How many of you grew up on a farm? How many of you are planning to be farmers? I suspect very few. The Industrial Revolution has allowed us to develop incredibly complex economies where most of us are very far removed from food production. This is a very recent phenomenon. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, most of us would have had to have been farmers. It just wasn't that efficient. And there are the resources to support a myriad of jobs that we have today. The second important characteristic is cultural integration and coordination. Our complex society has forced us to integrate and coordinate on unprecedented levels. This has created broad cultural integration. We are all participating in the same broad culture. We buy the same products, consume the same pop culture, and participate in the same governmental structures. Think for a moment what it takes for you to purchase a cup of tea at Tim Hortons. How complicated does our society have to be for such a product to exist for purchase? If you bought a cup of tea this morning, how many people were involved in this transaction? One, maybe two people at Tim Hortons? And say you paid roughly $2 for that tea. Some of that money is split between them to pay their salaries. How about their manager? Does he or she get a cut of your $2 too? Is that all? Where did the tea come from? Somewhere in the world, probably somewhere in Southeast Asia, a farmer was paid part of your $2 to grow the tea in the tea bag. It probably passed through hundreds of different middlemen, import companies, shipping companies, on its way to Canada. Each of them also takes a small sliver of your $2. No one is doing any of this for free. What about the teacup? It's made out of paper. Someone at some point was paid a bit of your $2 to cut down a tree, which would eventually make the paper for the cup. What about the designers, the colors, the inks, and the other features? Companies were paid to do these things too, and your $2 goes to support that. The lid is made of plastic. A plastic company was paid to make it for Tim Hortons, but they probably had to pay another company for the chemicals to make the plastics, and so on. What about even that little metal staple that holds the little piece of paper attached to the tea bag? Someone somewhere was paid to dig up and mine that metal out of the ground and smelt it into something that would eventually become your staple. I think you get the idea. No doubt tens of thousands of people were paid a small slice of your $2 just so you could have tea in the morning. This is the very definition of a complex economy that the Industrial Revolution made possible. So how did this all get started? It all begins in Britain, and specifically it begins in the British textile industry in the late 1700s, with new labor-saving machines such as the spinning jenny that you see here. Eventually, new energy sources such as coal and steam were harnessed to further speed up the process. This was the beginning of factories. Soon other industries began to use the same ideas, and all European countries began to industrialize by the early 19th century. One of the reasons that Britain was able to industrialize first and so quickly are its resources and size. The island of Britain is rich in coal and iron, which are easily accessible and close to the surface. Its size plays a factor too. The island was quickly able to move new products from factories to markets with another invention of the Industrial Revolution, the railway. Here you see one of the first railroads from Manchester to Liverpool, England. Railroads would accelerate the production of the Industrial Revolution. They facilitated not only the moving of products and resources, but also people and communication. So how was chocolate affected by the Industrial Revolution? Well, all industries were inspired by the technological advances of the Industrial Revolution, and chocolate was no exception. Economic competition encouraged innovation. In 1828, a Dutch chemist by the name of Conrad Johannes van Houten took out a patent for a process which created powdered chocolate. That's his picture you see there on the right. Van Houten had found a way to cheaply extract the fat from roasted cacao nibs, then grind these processed nibs into a powder that was easy to store and cheap to make. The powder was easily mixed with water or milk to make a chocolate drink. Although ownership of it has changed several times over the past century and a half, the company that Van Houten created to market his invention is still around today. In 2006, 1.6 billion cups of Van Houten's hot chocolate were enjoyed in over 40 countries around the world. However, it would be another chocolate company which would make arguably the most important development for chocolate. In 1847, after Van Houten's patent on powdered chocolate expired, another company, J.S. Fry & Sons, created the first chocolate bar. They did this by mixing the new processed cocoa or cacao powder and cacao butter and placing them in a mold to set. The idea was a hit. The company then began to mass produce chocolate bars using an industrial model. Over 220 different chocolate products would be produced over the next few decades by Fry & Sons. One further innovation is required to produce the type of chocolate that most of us are familiar with today, and that innovation would occur in Switzerland. Switzerland was an early center for industrial chocolate production. François-Louis Callier opened up the first Swiss chocolate factory in 1819, although this was still to produce a chocolate drink, not a solid chocolate. And in 1826, the Swiss were producing chocolate by industrial means. In 1879, the big event, milk chocolate, was invented as a collaboration between an entrepreneur named Henri Nestlé, who created powdered milk, and a Swiss chocolate maker named Daniel Peter. Milk chocolate would become a Swiss hallmark. That same year, Daniels and Nestlé would join forces and create the Nestlé Company. Today, it is the largest food company in the world. Two other important Swiss companies deserve mention, and will no doubt be familiar to you. A company called Lindt & Sprüngli, better known as Lindt Chocolate, was founded in 1845. It grew out of a small confectionery shop in Zurich and eventually was bought out by a local chocolate factory. The Tolber Company is the second. It was founded by Theodor Tolber in Bern, Switzerland in 1908. Their signature brand of chocolate bar, the Tollerone bar, continues to be popular today, although the company was later bought out by Mondelez International. Together with Nestle, these companies would be at the forefront of the chocolate industry until the rise of Hershey's in the United States, which is the subject of our next podcast. All of these industrial developments meant that during the 19th century, chocolate lost its association with wealth and privilege. It also ceased to be associated with medicine. Instead, it was transformed into a sugary confectionery product for the masses. Cheap chocolate was now easily available to everyone. As a result, the per capita consumption of sugar and confectionaries in general skyrocketed. In our next podcast, we'll explore how chocolate, advertising, and the growth of mass society produce a modern chocolate culture in the 20th century.